Alright, enough time has passed. We need to talk about this in some detail. You think you know the biggest comic book controversy this week, right? You think you do? No, probably not. It's not a story about low sales, or bad art, or a character changing race. This is a story about money and morality, and how DC Comics just threw away tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more, to unsell a comic that was already sitting in your hands. We're talking, of course, about the recent cancellation of the Red Hood Black Label series by DC. The headline you saw is that they just canceled it. No big deal, right? No big whoop. But what they actually did, the corporate maneuver that should, maybe bother you a little bit, should terrify even creators and publishers, was issue a scorched earth financial recall. They literally credited comic book shops for every copy of Red Hood #1 that those stores had already invoiced, including the ones already sold to customers. That's right. DC basically knocked on the door of the direct market, handed them back the money, and said, forget we ever met. The cost of that single decision, unclear, but at least tens of thousands of dollars from what we know for what the writer was paid. All because of 3 lines of text on a screen. The question isn't why they canceled it. The question, for the first time in comic history, is what is the dollar value of a single political tweet? Or maybe 2 if you want to bunch them together. Stick around because the answer redefines the work for hire contract that should concern everyone involved in creating comics. The core crisis, as we've been able to figure it out, is surrounding the writer named Gretchen Felker Martin. Her work, admittedly, was designed to be transgressive under DC's prestige Black Label imprint. This was a boundary-pushing series from the jump, but the internal boundaries, the ones in the story, weren't necessarily the problem. The external boundaries were the problem. On the very day the book hit shelves, an American conservative activist by the name of Charlie Kirk was assassinated. What followed was immediate, aggressive, and corporate suicide for the project. Screenshots of posts from the writer circulated on X and Reddit and everywhere you can think of, celebrating the violent death of that political figure. Think about the timing. This isn't a slow burn controversy. This isn't something that was bumbling under the surface for a long period of time. This is a 5-alarm blaze on the day of the book's debut. Boom, gone, just like that. The backlash came, as you can imagine, fast and highly organized. I was participating in that, to be frank. It wasn't about the comic. It was about the creator's public moral conduct and how that conduct sullied DC's brand and impacted the intellectual property of Red Hood. And DC's response wasn't a warning, it was an immediate decapitation. Now, to understand the pros and the cons and the moral justification for it, we have to look at DC's official stance on the topic. That's crucial. They didn't mention politics, they didn't mention the activist, they used this precise corporate phrasing. Posts or public comments that can be viewed as promoting hostility or violence are inconsistent with DC's standards of conduct. That's the formal statement. This isn't a critique of the story's content, it's a non-negotiable enforcement of a conduct clause. They're defending the primary asset, the DC brand. The publisher's reaction was unprecedented in its speed and severity because the risk was not creative, it was fiduciary. They're protecting the character of Red Hood and the Batman IP from being forever linked to the celebration of real-world political assassination. Remember, this was a Black Label book meant to be mature and boundary-pushing. That's the irony. They give you the keys to this $10 billion IP portfolio of everything that's in DC proper, Batman, Superman, Red Hood, and say, push the boundaries of the narrative, be dark, be transgressive, be whatever you want to be, but the second you step outside the fictional sandbox and endorse violence in the real world, the corporation says, thank you, you're gone, next, go find somebody else. The decision to cancel the title rather than just replacing the writer and continuing with a new creative team signals something profound that everybody needs to pay attention to. The publisher determined that the reputational damage was so extensive, the project itself was toxic. The creative team was disposable. The IP, however, is eternal. This brings us to a pretty important question that I need your feedback on. The ethical labyrinth. The comic community, as Screen Rant and Bleeding Cool articles confirm, is rife with past controversies. Creators accused of all kinds of misconduct, sometimes sexual, just sometimes violent, sometimes substance abuse. You've got financial fraud and generalized racism. In many of those cases, publishers moved far slower or sometimes not at all, or at least not at all until too much damage had been done. So here's the question you have to ask yourself. Was DC's swift, financially punitive response here justified as a defense of nonviolence, or Was it a politically motivated overreaction because the controversy was highly visible, highly organized, and potentially damaging to Walmart and Amazon distribution deals? Let me know what you think in the comments below. This entire action is rooted in the magic words, work for hire. And that's where the leverage is. Our research breaks down the legal reality. DC Comics owns Jason Todd 100%. The writer is an independent contractor, an employee for a specific task. They don't own the underlying IP. For this reason, the publisher can terminate the contract for any stipulated breach, including the vague but powerful clause of conduct inconsistent with the image of the company. They have the legal high ground. The corporation's fiduciary duty to its shareholders always, and I mean always, outweighs a contractor's right to unbridled free expression when that expression is perceived to damage the brand. Of course, these things don't happen in a vacuum. When sales and distribution are involved, there are multiple parties you have to think about. So let's talk about the retailers and the retailer credit that happened in this case, the refund for sold comics, because that's a masterclass in corporate risk mitigation. Comic shops, also known as the direct market, are small businesses. It's a collection. A massive organized boycott coupled with angry customers demanding refunds could cripple them. DC didn't just protect itself, it also made the move to protect its distributors, which are the local comic shops. By absorbing the financial hit, as confirmed by the report from ICV2, DC signaled that it values the stability of the entire retail ecosystem over short-term revenue from a single title. They placed ethical risk mitigation above profit protection. That's not ethics, that's smart business. You burn one creator to save thousands of relationships. It's ruthless, and it's effective, and it's also necessary. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, how did they do this in the past? This isn't the first time some creator mouthed off on social media or in some interview and said some terrible things. What's the difference between then and now? Well, let's take a look at the history books. We used to have the Comics Code Authority, or the CCA, established in 1954. The CCA policed the content. No sympathy for the criminal, good must triumph over evil, no gore. That's how they basically tamped down on the consistency and the suitability of the comics for younger readers. It was censorship of the fiction itself. Today, the CCA is dead. It doesn't even exist anymore. Black Label exists precisely to tell stories outside those restrictive confines. But here's the twist, and this is the vital point. The external social media environment has become a new, informal form of the CCA. It doesn't censor the fiction, it censors the creator's public ethics. This is a far more pervasive and frankly terrifying clause for artists. So when people go on to social media platforms like X or Blue Sky or Facebook, and they start mouthing off about violence against either an individual or a government agency, that usually involves a suspension or sometimes a complete lockdown. So censorship is happening, but violence is the line. That's the red line everyone is holding, and unfortunately, for some creators, they didn't get the memo. Let's call this form of censorship the social media morality clause. It operates 24/7 because the internet is 24/7. It governs speech when you're off the clock, sitting in your kitchen talking about your politics. DC's enforcement is designed to protect the parent company, Warner Brothers Discovery, from three main risks, according to legal analysts cited in The Hollywood Reporter, which is one of the reports we have here. First, reputational damage. No major studio wants their IP associated with the glorification of real-world violence. Period. End of story, and I think that's pretty clear for everybody to understand. Second, you have financial risk, losing those crucial retail distribution partners. If the reputation gets too bad, people don't want to do business with you. Again, that's pretty easy to understand. Third, and perhaps the most subtle, legal and HR exposure. When a creator publicly celebrates assassination, it can be argued they're creating a hostile work environment for other DC staff who may disagree or feel unsafe being associated with that project. If you have a creator coming in and they're talking about killing this person, killing that person, killing the president, killing the government official, killing whatever, and they're constantly talking about that type of violent rhetoric, is that somebody you really want working next to you? Is that somebody you want to be palling around with or just working with them in a conference room? It creates a hostile, potentially unsafe, and uncomfortable work environment. DC's line is drawn at promoting hostility or violence. But hostility is subjective. Violence we get, hostility maybe not so much. This is where we have to be a little bit careful about how we walk that line. If a creator has called for a general boycott of a political group, that's high hostility, but non-violent. Would DC have canceled the book? Probably not. They may have issued a quiet warning, but that's about it. The statement from DC clearly shows the line. Do not publicly celebrate, promote, or encourage physical violence or death. The second you cross that threshold, you trigger the highest level of financial and legal risk. You essentially issue a voluntary career-ending liability against your own contract. You fired yourself, but the company got to sign the pink slip. Now let's pivot to the cost paid by the creative team. The immediate fear is the chilling effect. This cancellation demonstrates that even secured high-profile work is instantly vulnerable to screenshots and organized backlash. Every social media post is now a potential career-ending liability. As confirmed by analysis across the industry, particularly in the beat, creators are being forced to self-censor. Those from marginalized groups who often have passionate and charged political viewpoints are the ones most exposed. The publishers demanding the silence of an employee without giving them the protection of one. So all future would-be creators now have to understand that is the cost of doing business with DC and potentially Marvel. Because here's the fundamental ethical imbalance, the paradox of the entire industry. Creators are defined legally as independent contractors. They lack the HR and labor protections of full-time employees. No fixed hours, few benefits, sometimes no benefits, and easy termination. That's the contractor status. It's sometimes also referred to as the gig economy. But by enforcing a code of conduct that governs their off-the-clock, non-work-related public speech, publishers are effectively treating them as de facto employees whose moral conduct is tied to the company image. You get the legal vulnerability of a contractor, but the moral discipline of a tightly controlled corporate spokesperson. It's a bad deal for the talent, and it will be a key point in future labor negotiations. So to an extent, I agree with what happened with Red Hood. We still have to be fair and balanced about it. There's an inconsistency. If the line is purely ethical, why has the industry, including DC, moved so slowly or not at all to remove creators facing serious allegations like sexual misconduct or racism? The perception, accurately not, is that DC is quick to act when the controversy is politically charged and affects the broad public discourse and distribution deals, but slow to act when the controversy affects internal labor issues or less visible marginalized communities. The swiftness of the Red Hood action sets a high bar, but the lack of retroactive action makes the publisher look less like a moral guardian and more like a crisis management firm. Let's be perfectly clear on the legal side, as this is often misunderstood. We need the intellectual curiosity here. The First Amendment protects you from censorship by the government. It does not protect an independent contractor from losing their contract due to speech deemed harmful to the employing company's business interests. DC Comics is a private entity and it is on solid ground. Their decision relies on a clear breach of a moral conduct clause. You're free to say what you want in your kitchen, but the second you tie that political speech, especially one celebrating violence, to a multi-billion-dollar IP like the Batman and his family, the contract wins. The IP is the boss, and the IP has a lawyer. This is what DC is learning from their mistake. They failed the institutional risk assessment. Felker Martin's controversial history was, by many accounts, publicly available before she was even hired. So you have to wonder, why was she hired in the first place? What did they think was going to happen? Why were they so lax in their hiring practice? Well, that's water under the bridge, so we have to think about what happens next. The future of hiring for AAA comic work will involve probably mandatory, rigorous digital footprint audits. Publishers will hire third-party HR firms to scour potential creators' social media histories, specifically looking for hate speech, threats, or toxic political views. You think your old tweets are gone? Think again. The vetting process just got more invasive and much more expensive for the publisher. And this brings us to the most terrifying contractual change yet, something that will appear in potentially all new work-for-hire agreements, the pre-vetting and vetting history clause. It will require creators to consent to a deeper review of their existing social media history, granting the publisher the right to terminate based on historical posts deemed inconsistent with the company's image. This is now the cleanup crew. The corporation wants the ability to terminate based on something you said 5 years ago before you even signed the contract, if it suddenly becomes a viral liability today. The moral baseline for major IP work is rapidly shifting toward non-political blandness. There will be a tiered system of risk tolerance, obviously, depending on the creator. Our research suggests the flagship characters like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman will now operate under a virtual zero-tolerance policy for creator controversy. You get a little more wiggle room on the smaller creator-owned titles, but if you touch the Bat family, you must be a corporate ghost. This means that the most desirable jobs, the ones that pay the best and give the highest exposure, will increasingly be reserved for creators who maintain a strictly neutral or non-controversial online presence. The reward for your social media silence just went up significantly. It's a pragmatic trade-off. Fame for self-censorship. And if you think this only affects DC and Marvel, you probably need to think again. The pressure extends to Image, Dark Horse, and IDW, even for creator-owned titles. Why? Because they all rely on the same mainstream distributors and retailers. If a major distributor like Lunar, for example, faces boycotts due to one creator's speech, they will in turn pressure all publishers, regardless of their ownership model, to enforce a basic code of conduct to keep their titles on the shelves. This means even creator-owned contracts may soon include a clause allowing the publisher to cease distribution if a creator's conduct puts the company at severe commercial risk. The tail wags the dog, and the distributor is holding the leash. So let's turn back a little bit to the tweet that started this whole thing. The financial loss, as reported across multiple trade outlets like CBR and Newsarama, includes the printing costs, the shipping costs, the marketing spend, the editor's time, the colorist's fees, the letterer's fees, and then the massive, unprecedented cost of refunding money for product already sold. We are easily taking in the mid to high six figures just to make a public statement. DC paid the price to establish its new definitive stance, which is no celebration of real-world violence. The price tag is the new floor for creator ethics in the AAA comics industry. It's the ultimate example of protecting the brand at all costs. And so we're going to come into this new era. The legacy of the Red Hood cancellation is a permanent change in contractual rigor. Future contracts will not use vague language. They will explicitly ban any public statements that glorify, celebrate, or encourage violence, hostility, or illegal activity against any group or individual. They're learning from the event. They're closing the legal loopholes. They're ensuring that the protection extends not to just to DC Comics, but to the entire parent company, Warner Brothers Discovery. This means a single bad tweet could jeopardize not just a comic book job, but a potential TV or animation opportunity under the same corporate umbrella. It's one tweet, one contract, one corporate overlord. What's the single most important message here? It's not about politics, it's about property. The creator's off-the-hook political speech is now a 24/7 contract liability, with a zero-tolerance line drawn at celebrating violence. In the world of work for hire, you are a temporary custodian of a billion-dollar character. Your personal platform, your personal politics, must be secondary to the character's reputation. If you can't separate your political fury from your professional platform, you simply cannot be trusted with the keys to the kingdom. This leaves creators with a stark choice. Either embrace the visibility of your public opinion, but be prepared for instant financial punitive discipline and look toward creator-owned work, or maintain a disciplined, non-controversial online persona to secure the higher-paying, higher-profile work-for-hire contracts. It's a strategic choice, not a moral one. The industry has made its bed, and DC has thrown tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars onto that mattress to make sure every single creator understands the betting policy. The cancellation of Red Hood wasn't a PR stumble, it was a pivot point. DC established the definitive red line in the sand. Every contract is now a time bomb, and your social media feed is the fuse. The cost of corporate image protection is now quantified, and it's astronomical. This is the new high-stakes reality. Now, if you found this analysis sharp, critical, and potentially illuminating, and I suspect you did, then you understand the inner workings of the industry better than 90% of the people who just skim the headlines. Don't miss another crucial breakdown of the comic industry's ethical and financial labyrinth. Hit that subscribe button right now to get ready for the next video. Now, go read comics, but read wisely. I'll see you next time for more comical opinions.